The mountains don't scream when something goes wrong. They don't warn you. They don't rush to your rescue. They simply watch. In winter, Appalachia becomes something ancient and unforgiving, a frozen cathedral of towering trees and narrow hollows where sound dies quickly and darkness settles early. Snow presses down on everything, muting footsteps, swallowing trails, and erasing proof that anyone was ever there at all. Campers come here chasing quiet, freedom, or healing, believing the wilderness will cleanse them. What they don't realize is that winter strips away comfort, distractions, and excuses, leaving only the truth of who you are when fear has nowhere to hide. The stories you're about to hear are not just about something moving beyond the firelight, or voices carried by icy wind. They are about endurance when hope feels like it's freezing inside your chest, about faith when logic collapses, and about the lessons learned when survival becomes a moment-by-moment decision whispered into the dark. The first story begins with a man named Thomas, a quiet man who had stopped speaking much after his marriage ended, in January, when the Appalachians were buried beneath heavy snow and the roads narrowed to ribbons of ice. He packed his truck and drove deep into the Monongahela National Forest. He told himself he needed solitude, that the mountains would help him think, but what he really needed was to escape the noise inside his own head. The forest welcomed him with bare branches clawing at the steel-gray sky and cold air that burned his lungs with every breath. His boots crunched loudly at first, then softer as the snow deepened. By the time he set up his tent, the sun was already slipping behind the ridgeline, taking warmth with it. The first night was manageable. The fire crackled, his breath steamed, and the woods felt still but not hostile. By the second day, the temperature dropped sharply. His radio sputtered, then died completely. No weather updates, no voices, just silence thick enough to feel physical. That night, as the fire burned low, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No owls calling, no wind whispering through branches, just an oppressive stillness that made his own heartbeats sound like a drum. That was when he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate crunching in the snow, circling his tent. Every instinct screamed danger. His mind raced with images of bears, desperate people, things he couldn't name. The steps stopped when he held his breath, and resumed when he exhaled. Hours passed like this, fear coiling tighter with every sound. Panic urged him to run, to burst from the tent, and flee blindly into the forest, but something deeper told him to stay. Shaking violently, he whispered prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood, not polished prayers, just broken words, spoken through chattering teeth. He focused on breathing, on keeping his thoughts from spiraling. Slowly, the terror loosened its grip. Dawn eventually crept through the trees, pale and weak. When Thomas stepped outside, there were no footprints, no disturbances. Just untouched snow and his own trembling shadow. He packed immediately and left, later learning that a brutal storm had nearly cut him off from the trail entirely. Had he panicked, had he ignored that quiet inner voice beneath the fear, he likely wouldn't have survived. The mountains taught him that when everything goes silent, listening inward can save your life, and that lesson stayed with him long after the snow melted. Another winter, deeper in eastern Kentucky, two friends set up camp near an abandoned coal mining trail that hadn't seen regular use in decades. The place felt heavy, as if the land itself remembered suffering. Snow fell steadily, coating rusted equipment and broken timbers in white. The first night passed uneventfully, but isolation has a way of peeling back layers of the mind. On the second night, as they sat near the fire, they heard their names whispered from the trees. Soft, familiar. Each voice sounded like someone they loved. One heard his mother calling, the other his brother who had died years earlier. They stood frozen, fear and longing colliding painfully in their chests. Every step toward the sound felt like stepping toward something that could never truly be reached. They stayed by the fire until morning, afraid to follow the voices, afraid to sleep. When daylight came, the woods were ordinary again. No signs of movement. No tracks, just silence and cold air. Later, both admitted that the voices echoed regrets they'd never confronted. The mountains didn't create those whispers. Isolation gave them space to grow louder. That experience taught them that being alone doesn't invent fear. It reveals it, and facing what surfaces is terrifying but necessary for healing. In West Virginia, there is an old winter tale told in hushed tones about a man who believed something pale followed him through the snow. Each night, he saw it standing just beyond the firelight, unmoving, watching. Fear consumed him. He stopped maintaining his shelter, stopped feeding the fire, convinced nothing mattered anymore. When search teams eventually found him frozen only yards from safety, there were no tracks except his own. Fear hadn't killed him. The moment he abandoned, hope did. Appalachia is unforgiving to those who let despair win. And that story lingers as a warning passed between hikers and rangers alike. Not all winter horror stories end in death. In Tennessee, a woman hiking a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail became trapped after a sudden ice storm erased her trail markers. Disoriented and alone, she could have panicked. Instead, she focused on discipline. She built shelter carefully, rationed supplies, melted snow for water, and marked trees with fabric. The nights were long and terrifying, filled with distant howls and shadows dancing at the edge of her vision, but she stuck to routine. When rescuers finally found her days later, alive and alert, she said, discipline gave her something fear couldn't take away: control. In the face of horror, small, steady actions can mean survival. Many winter campers report the feeling of being watched in Appalachia, even when there's no evidence of animals or people nearby. One man fled his campsite after sensing something behind him all night, only to have rangers later confirm no wildlife activity in the area. Fear has a way of projecting itself outward, turning imagination into a threat. The lesson here isn't to ignore instinct, but to understand it. There's power in learning when fear is a warning, and when it is simply a reflection of what's already inside you. Folklore speaks of figures, sometimes called snow watchers, shapes glimpsed between trees during heavy snowfall. They don't approach. They don't speak. They simply observe. Campers who mock the stories often experience strange events: fires extinguished without wind, gear moved, compasses spinning uselessly. Those who show quiet respect, who speak aloud, acknowledging the land, often report peaceful nights. Whether these stories are superstition or something older, they teach humility. The mountains remind you that you are small, and survival often depends on respecting forces you cannot fully understand. In Virginia, a winter rescue revealed another truth. A stranded camper survived by remembering advice passed down from his grandfather, a former ranger. Though physically alone, he carried generations of wisdom with him. He later said he felt guided, comforted by voices of those who taught him how to survive. Even alone in the snow, he was never truly alone. Community doesn't disappear just because no one is physically beside you. Every winter horror story from Appalachia shares one quiet truth: the sun always rises. Campers who survive often describe dawn as something sacred, light spilling over frozen ground, like forgiveness. Darkness convinces you it will last forever, that the cold will never loosen its grip, but it always does. Holding on through the night is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. As these disturbing and scary winter camping horror stories from Appalachia linger in your mind, remember that fear does not define you. Silence does not mean abandonment. Cold does not mean the end. Whatever winter you are walking through right now, you are stronger than the darkness surrounding you. Keep your fire alive, even if it feels small. Listen when everything else goes quiet. Hold on to hope with numb fingers if you have to. May you find courage in lonely places, peace in the silence, and faith strong enough to carry you through every frozen night. Watched over, guided, and protected, until the light returns, and your path becomes clear again.